my face.
You're live.
Yeah. Okay.
So, quickly before I go, these lovely little heaters.
Yes. That's a propane one?
You want to get them these little canisters inside. You want to push this in, get it over to pilot, leave it there for a second, then you push down, straight down, and hold down until you get a light on. And then when you get a light on, you want to ease off after a little while, and then turn it up to high, or low, so call.
Okay.
And blow burn, and then 2 seconds after it's done.
Demo
And if you kick it, it will automatically shut off. That's one of the stupid safety features. That makes everybody cranky.
Okay. Thank you, Sam.
Here's the secondary one.
So I can be surrounded.
It'll run for I think 3-4 hours on the tank.
Yeah.
I'll be back with more tanks later, and I figure I'll be back with the lighting for it here. I couldn't fit it all in there in one go, but
Thank you very much.
I will click into it from my phone a second.
Yeah, let me know how it sounds. But like I said, if I got the amp going.
Yeah, you should be.
If you want to move my car,
Yeah.
be a big. There you go.
NHS Broadcasting Club, live Freedom-Buster. Oh, it's connecting to Bluetooth to the car.
Oh, it's on a delay. I'm listening to the past.
Oh, you can hear me without the. I'm gonna turn down that mic. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
There's you saying it's on a delay. It's turned down. Let's see if we can hear it.
How about now? Is it better? It's still bad sound, bad audio. How does that sound?
There's I turned down. See.
Okay. It's just like that metallic kind of.
Still, it's really icky still.
How about now? We'll test. For anybody who's tuning in this early, thank you so much for bearing with our technical difficulties. We have a very dedicated senior student, Sam Meyerbean, who is here helping me out.
The metallic is gone.
Good.
It has a bit of an amp tone to it.
I can, that's probably the tone. You know what I mean? I can
Yeah,
turn
it
down
has
the reverb.
a very tiny bit. I think that's the least I'm going to get out of it. You should be all set to go.
Awesome.
I'm going
I
to...
don't need reverb. I'm good.
What?
I'm just going to turn on the reverb a little. I think it'll make the audio a little cleaner.
Yeah.
A little bit better there. That sounded a little bit more like me. Sam, here's my keys. Right. Well, it's a little bit backwards, but I wanted to start today with a bedtime story. And that's for people who are still snuggled up. So I'm going to share with you something from one of my absolute favorite books, The Wind in the Willows. My dad gave me this when I was 12 years old, maybe 11. My dad used to read this to us, not even at bedtime, but after dinner. We'd go into the living room and he would get one of his favorite books out. There were a few of them. Wind in the Willows was top shelf, top of the charts. And another one was Tom the Water Baby by Charles Kingsley. And I'm going to read you what he wrote to me in the copy he gave me. Michael, this is one of my most favorite books. I would like it and hope that it might be one of yours. That is your free will choice. This is my gift to you, something that I hope you will enjoy to the end of your days and share with your children and their children. And if you do not have children, you will pass on to those you love. Love, Dad. 7/17/1990, so I was 11. And the section I'm going to read is a nice chapter, and it's called The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. The willow wren was twittering his thin little song, having hidden himself in the dark selvage of the riverbank. Though it was past 10 o'clock at night, the sky still clung to and retained some lingering skirts of light from the departed day, and the sullen heats of the torrid afternoon broke up and rolled away at the dispersing touch of the cool fingers of the short midsummer night. Mole lay stretched on the bank, still panting from the stress of the fierce day that had been cloudless from dawn to late sunset, and waited for his friend to return. He had been on the river with some companions, leaving the water rat free to keep an engagement of long standing with Otter. And he had come back to find the house dark and deserted and no sign of Rat, who was doubtless keeping it up late with his old comrade. It was still too hot to think of staying indoors, so he lay on some cool dock leaves and thought over the past day and its doings, and how very good they all had been. The rat's light footfall was presently heard approaching over the parched grass. Oh, the blessed coolness, he said, and sat down, gazing thoughtfully into the river, silent and preoccupied. You stayed to supper, of course, said the mole presently. Simply had to, said the rat. They wouldn't hear of my going before. You know how kind they always are, and they made things as jolly for me as ever they could, right up to the moment I left. But I felt a brute all the time, as it was clear to me they were very unhappy, though they tried to hide it. Mole, I'm afraid they're in trouble. Little Portly is missing again, and you know what a lot his father thinks of him, though he never says much about it. What, that child? Said the mole lightly. Well, suppose he is. Why worry about it? He's always straying off and getting lost and turning up again. He's so adventurous. But no harm ever happens to him. Everybody hereabouts knows him and likes him, just as they do old Otter. And you may be sure some animal or other will come across him and bring him back again all right. Why, we found him ourselves, miles from home, and quite self-possessed and cheerful. Yes, but this time it's more serious, said the rat gravely. He's been missing for some days now, and the otters have hunted everywhere, high and low, without finding the slightest trace. And they've asked every animal, too, for miles around, and no one knows anything about him. Otter's evidently more anxious than he'll admit. I got out of him that young Portly hasn't learned to swim very well yet. And I can see he's thinking of the weir. There's a lot of water coming down still, considering the time of year, and the place always had a fascination for the child. And then there are traps and things, you know. Otter's not the fellow to be nervous about any son of his before it's time, and now he is nervous. When I left, he came out with me, said he wanted some air, and talked about stretching his legs. But I could see it wasn't that, so I drew him out and pumped him and got it all from him at last. He was going to spend the night watching by the ford. You know the place where the old ford used to be in bygone days before they built the bridge? I know it well, said the mole. But why should Otter choose to watch there? Well, it seems that it was there he gave Portly his first swimming lesson, continued the rat, from that shallow, gravelly spit near the bank. And it was there he used to teach him fishing, and there young Portly caught his first fish, of which he was so very proud. The child loved the spot, and Otter thinks that if he came wandering back from wherever he is, If he is anywhere by this time, poor little chap, he might make for the ford he was so fond of. Or if he came across it, he'd remember it well and stop there and play perhaps. So Otter goes there every night and watches. On the chance, just on the chance. They were silent for a time, both thinking of the same thing. The lonely, heart-sore animal crouched by the ford, waiting and watching. The long night through on the chance. Well, said the rat presently, I suppose we ought to be thinking about turning in. But he never offered to move. Rat, said the mole, I simply can't go and turn in and go to sleep and do nothing, even though there doesn't seem to be anything to be done. We'll get the boat out and paddle upstream. The moon will be up in an hour or so, and then we will search as well as we can. Anyhow, it will be better than going to bed and doing nothing. Just what I was thinking myself, said the rat. It's not the sort of night for bed anyhow, and daybreak is not so very far off. And then we may pick up some news of him from early risers as we go along. They got the boat out, and the rat took the sculls, paddling with caution. Out in midstream there was a clear, narrow track that faintly reflected the sky. But wherever shadows fell on the water from bank, bush, or tree, they were as solid to all appearance as the banks themselves, and the mole had to steer with judgment accordingly. Dark and deserted as it was, the night was full of small noises, song and chatter and rustling, telling of the busy little population who were up and about, plying their trades and vocations through the night till sunshine should fall on them at last and send them off to their well-earned repose. The water's own noises, too, were more apparent than by day, its gurglings and cloops more unexpected and near at hand, and constantly they started at what seemed a sudden clear call from an actual articulate voice. The line of the horizon was clear and hard against the sky, and in one particular quarter it showed black against a silvery climbing phosphorescence that grew and grew. At last, over the rim of the waiting earth, the moon lifted with slow majesty till it swung clear of the horizon and rode off, free of moorings. And once more they began to see surfaces, meadows widespread and quiet gardens, and the river itself from bank to bank, all softly disclosed, all washed clean in mystery and terror, all radiant again as by day, but with a difference that was tremendous. Their old haunts greeted them again in other raiment, as if they had slipped away and put on this pure new apparel and come quietly back, smiling as they shyly waited to see if they would be recognized again under it. Fastening their boat to a willow, the friends landed in this silent silver kingdom and patiently explored the hedges, the hollow trees, the tunnels and their little culverts, the ditches and dry waterways. Embarking again and crossing over, they worked their way up the stream in this manner, while the moon, serene and detached in a cloudless sky, did what she could, though so far off, to help them in their quest, till her hour came, and she sank earthwards, reluctantly, and left them. And mystery once more held field and river. Then a change began slowly to declare itself. The horizon became clearer. Field and tree came more into sight, and somehow with a different look. The mystery began to drop away from them. A bird piped suddenly and was still, and a light breeze sprang up, and set the reeds and bulrushes rustling. Rat, who was in the stern of the boat, while Mole sculled, sat up suddenly and listened with a intentness. Mole, who with gentle strokes was just keeping the boat moving, while he scanned the banks with care, looking at him with curiosity. It's gone, sighed the rat, sinking back in his seat again, so beautiful and strange and new. Since it was to end so soon, I almost wish I had never heard it. For it has roused a longing in me that is pain, and nothing seems worthwhile but just to hear that sound once more and go on listening to it forever. No, there it is again, he cried, alert once more. Entranced, he was silent for a long space, spellbound. Now it passes on and I begin to lose it, he said presently. O Mole, the beauty of it, the merry bubble and joy, the thin, clear, happy call of the distant piping, Such music I never dreamed of, and the call in it is stronger even than the music is sweet. Row on, mole, row, for the music and the call must be for us. The mole, greatly wondering, obeyed. I hear nothing myself, he said, but the wind playing in the reeds and rushes and osiers. The rat never answered, if indeed he heard. Rapt, transported, trembling, he was possessed in all his senses by this new divine thing that caught up his helpless soul and swung and dandled it, a powerless but happy infant in a strong, sustaining grasp. In silence, Mole rowed steadily, and soon they came to a point where the river divided, a long backwater branching off to one side. With a slight movement of his head, Rat, who had long dropped the rudder lines, directed the rower to take the backwater. The creeping tide of light gained and gained, and now they could see the color of the flowers that gemmed the water's edge. Clearer and nearer still, cried the rat joyously. Now you must surely hear it. Ah, at last I see you do. Breathless and transfixed, the mole stopped rowing, as the liquid run of that glad piping broke on him like a wave, caught him up, and possessed him utterly. He saw the tears on his comrade's cheeks, and bowed his head, and understood. For a space they hung there, brushed by the purple loose strife that fringed the bank. Then the clear, imperious summons that marched hand in hand with the intoxicating melody imposed its will on Mole, and mechanically he bent to his oars again. And the light grew steadily stronger, but no birds sang as they were wont to do at the approach of dawn, but for the heavenly music all was marvelously still. On either side of them, as they glided onwards, the rich meadow grass seemed that morning of a freshness and a greenness unsurpassable. Never had they noticed the roses so vivid, the willow herb so riotous, the meadow sweet so odorous and pervading. Then the murmur of the approaching weir began to hold the air, and they felt a consciousness that they were nearing the end, whatever it might be, that surely awaited their expedition. A wide half circle of foam and glinting lights and shining shoulders of green water. The great weir closed the backwater from bank to bank, troubled all the quiet surface with twirling eddies and floating foam streaks, and deadened all other sounds with its solemn and soothing rumble. In midmost of the stream, embraced in the weir's shimmering arm spread, a small island lay anchored, fringed close with a willow and a silver birch and alder. Reserved, shy, but full of significance, it hid whatever it might hold behind a veil, keeping it till the hour should come, and with the hour those who were called and chosen. Slowly, but with no doubt or hesitation whatever, and in something of a solemn expectancy, the two animals passed through the broken, tumultuous water and moored their boat at the flowery margin of the island. In silence they landed, and pushed through the blossom and scented herbage, and undergrowth that led up to the level ground, till they stood on a little lawn of a marvelous green set round with nature's own orchard trees, crabapple, wild cherry, and sloe. This is the place of my song dream, the place the music played to me, whispered the rat, as if in a trance. Here in this holy place, here if anywhere, surely we shall find him. Then suddenly the mole felt a great awe fall upon him, an awe that turned his muscles to water, bowed his head, and rooted his feet to the ground. It was no panic terror. Indeed, he felt wonderfully at peace and happy. But it was an awe that smote and held him, and without seeing, he knew it would only mean that some august presence was very, very near, some august presence. With difficulty, he turned to look for his friend, and saw him at his side, cowed, stricken, and trembling violently. And still there was utter silence in the populous bird-haunted branches around them. And still the light grew and grew. Perhaps he would never have dared to raise his eyes, but that, though the piping was now hushed, the call and the summons seemed still dominant and imperious. He might not refuse, were death himself waiting to strike him instantly, once he had looked with mortal eye on things rightly kept hidden. Trembling, he obeyed, and raised his humble head. And then, in that utter clearness of the imminent dawn, while nature, flushed with fullness of incredible color, seemed to hold her breath for the event, he looked in the very eyes of the friend and helper, saw the backward sweep of the curved horns, gleaming in the growing daylight, saw the stern hooked nose between the kindly eyes that were looking down on them humorously, while the bearded mouth broke into a half smile at the corners, saw the rippling muscles on the arm that lay across the broad chest, the long supple hand still holding the panpipes, only just fallen away from the parted lips. Saw the splendid curves of the shaggy limbs disposed in majestic ease on the sward. Saw last of all, nestling between his very hooves, sleeping soundly in entire peace and contentment, the little, round, podgy, childish form of the baby otter. All this he saw, for one moment breathless and intense, vivid on the morning sky, and still, as he looked, he lived, and still as he lived he wondered. "Rat," he found breath to whisper, shaking, "are you afraid?" "Afraid," murmured the rat, his eyes shining with unutterable love. "Afraid? Of him? Oh, never, never. And yet, oh mole, I am afraid." Then the two animals, crouching to the earth, bowed their heads and did worship. Sudden and magnificent, the sun's broad golden disk showed itself over the horizon facing them. And the first rays, shooting across the level water meadows, took the animals full in the eyes and dazzled them. When they were able to look once more, the vision had vanished, and the air was full of the carol of birds that hailed the dawn. As they stared blankly, in dumb misery, deepening as they slowly realized all they had seen and all they had lost, a capricious little breeze, dancing up from the surface of the water, tossed the aspens, shook the dewy roses, and blew lightly and caressingly in their faces. And with its soft touch came instant oblivion. For this is the last best gift that the kindly demigod is careful to bestow on those to whom he has revealed himself in their helping. The gift of forgetfulness, lest the awful remembrance should remain and grow, and overshadow mirth and pleasure, and the great haunting memory should spoil all the afterlives of little animals helped out of difficulties, in order that they should be happy and lighthearted as before. Mole rubbed his eyes and stared at Rat, who was looking about him in a puzzled sort of way. "I beg your pardon? What did you say, Rat?" he asked. "I think I was only remarking," said Rat slowly, "that this was the right sort of place, and that here, if anywhere, we should find him. And look, why there he is, the little fellow." And with a cry of delight, he ran towards the slumbering Portly. But Mole stood still a moment, held in thought, as one weakened suddenly from a beautiful dream, who struggles to recall it, and can recapture nothing but a dim sense of the beauty of it, the beauty, till that too fades away in its turn, and the dreamer bitterly accepts the hard, cold waking and all its penalties. So Mole, after struggling with his memory for a brief space, shook his head sadly and followed the rat. Portly woke up with a joyous squeak and wriggled with pleasure at the sight of his father's friends, who had played with him so often in past days. In a moment, however, his face grew blank, and he fell to hunting round in a circle with a pleading whine, as a child that has fallen happily asleep in its nurse's arms and wakes to find itself alone and laid in a strange place, and searches corners and cupboards and runs from room to room, despair growing silently in its heart. Even so, Portly searched the island and searched, dogged and unwearying, till at last the black moment came for giving it up, and sitting down and crying bitterly. The mole ran quickly to comfort the little animal, but Rat, lingering, looked long and doubtfully at certain hoofmarks deep in the sward. "Some great animal has been here," he murmured slowly and thoughtfully, and stood musing, his mind strangely stirred. I'm going to show the picture. "Look," cried the rat, "why there he is, the little fellow." "Come along, Rat," called the mole. "Think of poor Otter waiting up there by the ford." Portly had soon been comforted by the promise of a treat, a jaunt on the river in Mr. Rat's real boat, and the two animals conducted him to the waterside, placed him securely between them in the bottom of the boat, and paddled off down the backwater. The sun was fully up by now, and hot on them, birds sang lustily and without restraint, and flowers smiled and nodded from either bank, but somehow, so thought the animals, with less of richness and blaze of color than they seemed to remember seeing quite recently, somewhere. They wondered where. The main river reached again. They turned the the boat's head upstream towards the point where they knew their friend was keeping his lonely vigil. As they drew near the familiar ford, the mole took the boat into the bank, and they lifted Portly out and set him on his legs on the towpath, gave him his marching orders and a friendly farewell pat on the back, and shoved him out into midstream. They watched the little animal as he waddled along the path contentedly and with importance, watched him till they saw his muzzle suddenly lift and his waddle break into a clumsy amble as he quickened his pace with shrill whines and wriggles of recognition. Looking up the river, they could see Otter start up, tense and rigid, from out of the shallows where he crouched in dumb patience, and could hear his amazed and joyous bark as he bounded up through the osiers onto the path. Then the mole, with a strong pull on one oar, swung the boat round and let the full stream bear them down again, whither it would, their quest now happily ended. "I feel strangely tired, Rat," said the mole, leaning wearily over his oars as the boat drifted. "It's being up all night, you'll say, perhaps, but that's nothing. We do as much half the nights of the week this time of the year. No, I feel as if I had been through something very exciting and rather terrible, and it was just over, and yet nothing particular has happened." "Or something very surprising and splendid and beautiful," murmured the rat, leaning back and closing his eyes. "I feel just as you do, Mole, simply dead tired, though not body tired. It's lucky we've got the stream with us to take us home. Isn't it jolly to feel the sun again, soaking into one's bones, and hark to the wind playing in the reeds? It's like music, faraway music," said the mole, nodding drowsily. "So I was thinking," murmured the rat, dreamful and languid. "Dance music, the lilting sort that runs on without a stop, but with words in it too. It passes into words and out of them again. I catch them at intervals. Then it is dance music once more, and then nothing but the reed's soft, thin whispering." Like that was dipping down. "And then nothing but the reed's soft, thin whispering." "You hear better than I," said the mole sadly. "I cannot catch the words." "Let me try and give you them," said the mole softly, his eyes still closed. "Now it is turning into words again, faint but clear, lest the awe should dwell, and turn your frolic to fret. You shall look on my power at the helping hour, but then you shall forget. Now the reeds take it up. Forget, forget, they sigh, and it dies away in a rustle and a whisper. Then the voice returns. Lest limbs be reddened and rent, I swing the trap that is set. As I loose the snare, you may glimpse me there, for surely you shall forget. Row nearer, mole, nearer to the reeds. It is hard to catch and grows each minute fainter. Helper and healer I cheer, small waifs in the woodland wet. Strays I find in it, wounds I bind in it, bidding them all forget. Nearer, mole, nearer. No, it is no good, the song has died away into reed talk. But what do the words mean? Asked the wondering mole. That I do not know, said the rat simply. I passed them on as they reached me. Yeah, I noticed it dropped down. I just put it back, but I want to say it's probably got to be tightened a little bit. So I think it might dip down again. Just looking at the ground.
Hey, well, I was on my way home. I opened it up on like Cross Ferry Road near my house, and I look at it, and it's hue from here down. I'm like, how does this happen? So I rewound it and played it at 4-speed while I'm driving. Bad idea. I didn't miss doing that. But at 4-speed, you can watch it. It's like a, and it was. I just
wow. I lost the attention of the camera. That's tough to do. Yeah. But what do the words mean? Asked the wondering mole. That I do not know, said the rat simply. I passed them on to you as they reached me. Now they return again, and this time full and clear. This time at last it is the real, the unmistakable thing, simple, passionate, perfect. Well, let's have it then, said the mole after he had waited patiently for a few minutes, half dozing in the hot sun. But no answer came, He looked and understood the silence, with a smile of much happiness on his face and something of a listening look still lingering there. The weary rat was fast asleep.
You should be good now for a little while.
Thanks, Sam.
Should drop down a little bit. I gave it 2 full turns on the
Good.
adjustment arm, so you should be fine. I'm going to keep monitoring it though.
I'm gonna bundle. Sun coming out is good, but yeah, it's chilly. Actually, Sam, can you turn this one on too? This broken one. It's my feet. My feet are the thing that's feeling it the most.
Yeah, are those like waterproof and such?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Now let they dry out.
Or if you have like another change of shoes.
Not with me.
Your face is looking a little cold there too.
Yeah, it's okay. My face feels good. Although I do want
a
to
little
my
bit of
gold.
snow frozen on the facial hair.
Oh, good. That's a good sign. I do gotta find my glasses for it.
Do you have like a ski mask for you?
I don't. I don't want to wear a balaclava though. It's a little intense. My glasses get up too. They fall off.
Alrighty, I'm gonna keep it monitored.
Okay.
If you need anything, call me.
Will do. Thanks, Dave. One thing I do need, if you think of it, I need a little mini USB for my phone. Like a charger. I have an Android,
Yeah.
so the one I got doesn't seem to want to work.
I might have you covered. I think I might have one in the car that'll work.
Oh, that'd be great. All right, welcome back. If you were paying attention, the camera was probably dipping there a little bit. It was probably kind of fun. Maybe you were nodding off too, so that was a nice happenstance.
This works. Not at 100%.
Let's plug it in. Yeah, let's plug it in here if we can. And then,
Samsung fast charger, so sure. Nothing? Is it possible that it can't, it's not sliding the way you're charging for it? We had to do my dad's phone for a while, just take the bottom end of his phone case off to get it in, and don't think that's your issue.
see, it's just kind of blinking. It's at the top right there. It's doing it without the. No, it's only doing it when I plug it in.
I wonder if it means it like give moisture in the board and you can't charge or something, so it's doing the shut off. Cause yours, mine will,
So put a little.
if there gets any little bit of moisture in the board, it'll give me a little ding ding.
Oh, really?
Ding ding, and it won't let me charge it yet.
Okay.
Well, that's not helping your case.
Let's not put any. Get rid of any moisture either. Do that and hope that that's working good.
I'll leave that with you. I know for a fact that charger does work. I was
Okay.
just using it this morning on the way here,
Okay.
so.
All right. So, I'd like to read "Pipers at the Gates of Dawn" because it stuck with me. I remember that story when my dad read it to me. I remember picking the book up again when I went to study abroad in England, and I found a copy of the book at a shop. And it was a nice vintage copy. It wasn't my copy. It wasn't the one that my dad had, put his inscription in. But it was really comforting to have that from home and to be able to read those words again. I'd been away from home, but that was really away from home, and so it was a great reminder. My dad passed away in 2017, and it was the anniversary of that is next month. It's February, and a big reason why I wanted to do this today was to share the things that he shared with me, to talk about him a little bit. I'm definitely a subscriber to the idea that you keep people alive by continuing to talk about them and share what they shared with you with other people. And keeping my dad's memory going is really important to me. I'm also here because of my mom, literally and figuratively. I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be who I am without both of them. And it's important to acknowledge that. It's important to talk about your origins and where you came from, and the values you were raised with, and the people who made a difference in your life, especially in those formative years. So I'm here for William Dickerson, and I'm here for Mary Lou Keene, and I'm going to share a lot of things that they shared with me today. The book, like I said, Wind in the Willows from my dad. I've got my mom's old English lit compendiums here as well. I'll probably be reading some selections from things that she has. They're great. They have these old marks in them. The notes she took on them for class, whether she was teaching as an English teacher or whether she was taking them down as a student. So I love looking at that. There's a great poem by Billy Collins called Marginalia, and it's a poem about the things left behind in the margins of a book that you get out from the library, and the kinds of insights you can have from the other readers who've looked at it. And it's excellent. Really just a great poem, and I recommend you look it up. So this is from my dad and this is from my mom, and the things I'm going to share today are in large part thanks to that. Martin Luther King has been important to me for almost all of my life as well. I would say as soon as I became aware of him, I was enthralled. My parents and I, some of my family, I'm the youngest of 5, but we took a trip down to Washington, D.C. I want to say I was probably around 2nd grade, and we were at the Smithsonian and some of the other museums and touring the mall, going around to the monuments. And in one of the museums, they had, this is before the African American History Museum, or some of the newer ones that have come out in the 21st century. So this was in the 1980s, and one of the museums had a video montage playing of Martin Luther King's speeches, and specifically the March on Washington, which is the best known of his work, 1963 in August. But he said a lot more too. Selma came after that, right? I've been to the mountaintop came after that. He launched a war against poverty. He launched a peace campaign against the Vietnam War. Martin Luther King wore out his welcome among the authorities that were willing to entertain his crowds in 1963. They felt as if the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that they'd heard everything they wanted to hear from this man who began his career, the Montgomery bus boycotts, and as a clergyman, who also, by the way, got his doctorate from my alma mater, Boston University. I always took a lot of indirect pride in thinking about being schooled at the same place where he was schooled, and the theological school, the School of Divinity at Boston University. I had classes in that building. It was not far from the College of Arts and Sciences, where the majority of my classes were, which were tremendously important to me as well. But he did a lot more than just those things. So despite having worn out his welcome, he continued to push and press and stand up and put his body in the way, put his ideas in the way, be a champion for people. And people hated him for that. They despised him, and he did it anyway. So I want to talk a little bit about that today too. I want to talk about not just the March on Washington and not just the quotes that everybody knows, but dig down a little bit into some of those ideas and to discuss those and confront them and take a look at them, even when they're uncomfortable, even when he's telling us things that are hard to hear. It's very easy to ignore those ideas now, and in this day and age, we're more distracted than ever. We have this amazing device that we carry around with us that can connect us with the whole wide world, and we settle for the space 12 inches in front of our face. And that's gotta change if we're ever gonna get somewhere, if we're gonna go see the mountaintop. Martin Luther King, I don't claim perfect knowledge, but just to go back to that Smithsonian moment, or the museum moment, the first time I came across him, I think we were actually, it was sort of like a cafeteria situation, and it was just adjacent to this display or this exhibit with Martin Luther King. And they were playing the March on Washington, the I Have a Dream speech on a loop. And just kind of listening to it while I was in line, and I was walking through, and it stopped me in my tracks. I was in second grade, but I couldn't believe that somebody was saying something that I understood was true, and it moved me. I got chills and goosebumps, and I always thought back to that. How did he do that? How did he convey something? Again, this is the 1980s, so probably 25 years, maybe 20, 25 years after he had said it. Well, let's see, I was second grade, so closer to 25. That really changed something in me that day, and I wanted to think back to it today. But I think Martin Luther King is misunderstood, even by the people who love him, and that includes me. And that's why I think he warrants a much deeper look, some contemplation, some time to consider what he said, consider his words, consider what he was prescient about, the things that he saw coming, the things that he saw at the time that others wouldn't acknowledge, the things that he saw when he looked back at our past. The March on Washington speech is, people really focus on that rhetoric, that clergyman polish of understanding when you've got the crowd with you and you take them on a journey and you deliver this message that really lifts them up. But the early part of the speech is fascinating too, because he talks about a promissory note. He talks about making good on the nation's first promises. And it's a deeply deeply conservative idea. Martin Luther King is chastised for being too progressive, too insistent, too impatient, and demanding that the country make good on a promissory note, demanding that the country make good on a promise it had made to its people, a promise it made about what it was supposed to be, about the American experiment. That is deeply conservative. Insisting that the country fulfill its contract, fulfill its terms. And you've always got to read the terms and conditions. My background in history, so I teach US history now, I teach economics, but my background is Irish studies, Irish history, European history as an undergrad. And definitely something of an Anglophile, somebody who liked English history, Irish history, and paid a lot of attention to that. So when I talk about people like Edmund Burke, who is celebrated by traditional conservatives, he's somebody I like to look into a lot, and he's somebody with an excellent sense of history as well. An important moment for him was the English Civil War, and he liked to differentiate between revolutions, and not to assume that everybody was in it for the same reasons or in it for a good cause necessarily. He wanted to evaluate what your intentions were, what your viewpoint was, what were your perspective. Are you there to tear things down only, or do you have an idea of what you want to put into its place? And his conception of the social contract, which was outright rejected by Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson thought Edmund Burke was an opportunist. He had been a lobbyist for the colony of New York in Parliament. He really thought he was a hired gun, a mind for hire, somebody who would be willing to give an argument and any for any paying customer. I don't subscribe to that view of Jefferson. I think he was right about a lot. I don't think he was right about Burke. But Burke's concept of the social contract was that it's not something we maintain only between us who are living, who are current, as Thomas Jefferson would have it. Thomas Jefferson said, we need a revolution every 20 years so that no one is beholden to the generation that comes before. How could you possibly legislate for the future? How could you possibly legislate for a group of people you'll never meet? But Edmund Burke talked about the continuity of that, the need for a social contract where you make pledges and promises and you fulfill them for the people from whom you received so much benefit, even if it was just their legacy, just their legacy. That is a tremendous gift. We don't acknowledge it. There's a lot of discussion in this country about what people deserve and, where's mine? We don't inherit our parents' debts, typically. We inherit their estates. We inherit their largesse. We inherit the things that they have, both material and immaterial. But we should think about the fact that though we don't inherit those debts, we may still be responsible for them, for rectifying them, for paying them. The social contract, as Edmund Burke would have it, was a contract between the living and the dead, and those who are yet to be born. And we have to be the bridge between those two generations. So I'm here today for my dad, I'm here today for my mom, and I'm here today for my students. I'm here today for all my friends and family, and all the people that I haven't met yet. because we have to bridge that gap. We have to fulfill that social contract. Martin Luther King knew that. Martin Luther King knew that there was an outstanding debt that had not been paid, and that the promissory note could not be considered fulfilled until we stepped up, stopped asking what's in it for me, and realized that we owe other people. So, like I said, it's a very conservative idea, and Edmund Burke would approve. Edmund Burke would approve of this idea going back to the English Civil War. In his conciliation speech with Parliament talking about the American Revolution, he said outright, Americans are jealous of their liberty. We guard it jealously. We have a sense of what is owed to us. We have a sense of our rights. It's almost part of our national atmosphere, ecosystem. He said we're a nation of lawyers, however amateur we may be, but we have a real sense of what we are owed. We have a real sense of obligations and contracts. We have a real sense of fairness, and we bristle at the idea that anybody should be immune from that. That anybody should be try to make themselves above that. Martin Luther King talked about the dream was the fulfillment of that promise. The dream was the fulfillment of the idea we are going to be a whole nation. We'll make ourselves whole. We'll have paid our debt when we live out the creed that all men are created equal, and of course women too. I don't know about it. I don't know Edmund Burke would have agreed with that, and that's unfortunate because it could detract from the rest of his message. But Martin Luther King definitely understood that, and I hope that we can understand that too. So what I'd like to do, just because the day is breaking, I'm seeing the sun come over the hill here in Niskuna. It's starting to get a little bit warmer. My feet are still very cold. I got a couple of propane heaters at my feet that are definitely helping out. But I'm gonna find my glasses, which I've already misplaced, and I'm going to start with the March on Washington, the I Have Dreams speech. It's required reading, and you don't need to read it yourself. You can listen, all right? Audiobooks are books, but it's required reading for all of us, right? If you've never taken the time, if you've never listened to it, you should listen to it. There's some instructions in it, and you've got to know what your marching orders are. So let me track down those glasses, and I'll take a quick little break. All right, lucky for you and lucky for me, those glasses are for long distance. I don't need them for reading, so I'm going to ignore them for now. I'm sure they will turn up. I've only been here this morning, so no place else. I'm going to read the annotations too. I think an editor spent some time on this and they might have something to say. This is perhaps the most well-known and most quoted address Dr. King delivered. He delivered this speech before the Lincoln Memorial on the 28th of August, 1963, as the keynote address of the March on Washington for Civil Rights and Jobs. The editor missed that part, but it was also an economic march. The television cameras allowed the entire nation to hear and see him plead for justice and freedom. Mrs. Coretta Scott King once commented, "At that moment it seemed as if the kingdom of God appeared, but it only lasted for a moment." All right. That is good context. I was talking with one of my colleagues at Niskayuna, Miss Kelly Millett, and she was telling me about how she applied to get Coretta Scott King to come to her campus and talk. And she came, and it was fantastic. It's just, you have these conversations, and you realize that, we're not talking about somebody who lived 1,000,000 years ago. We're not talking about a statue. We're talking about a real person who is sometimes separated from us by a single meeting. I know Kelly. Kelly met Coretta Scott King. Coretta Scott King was just quoted in this book. It's remarkable how easily the connections can come. But you gotta look for them. You gotta look for them. Okay. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Those are big shoes to fill, all right? That is not what I'm doing, but a tiny little echo of it. 50 years ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languish in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition, right? That demonstration, that publicity, and not just the television cameras, but the spectacle of seeing everybody there on the mall. Whether you're talking about the bonus army, or from Irish history, you're talking about the mass meetings of Daniel O'Connell with his penny dues, right? It was about showing mass and soul force. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. Now you hear that? It's not just to our benefit. It's not something that we just accrue as our legacy and inherit. Yes, we fall heir to it, and we can demand that it be paid. And that's something we have to demand of each other. This note was the promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note. insofar as their citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check. A check which has come back marked insufficient funds. And when you listen to the television broadcast, that part gets the biggest early cheer. Because they've seen that. They've seen checks come back, bad checks that bounced, being unable to make payments. Right? This was economic reality. This was lived reality for these people, lived experience. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. This is priority one. This is urgent. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. I love that. I love that. Autumn is kind of the harvest time. That's when the chickens come home to roost. That's when you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. And those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. Again, Edmund Burke would approve of all of this. Not giving into that panic mentality, herd mentality, mob mentality, not being allowing yourself to discard reason. What did John Adams say? To not make a shipwreck of conscience. And it's an important point to make. Again, Edmund Burke liked to classify and categorize the different revolutions. Whether he's talking about the English Civil War, the American Revolution, or the French Revolution, which he certainly distinguished from the American one. And he said, the French Revolution, the main problem they have is that they have no idea what they want to put in place. And they have given over to the passions of the mob, given over to the bitterness and the anger and the vengefulness. So Edmund Burke would definitely approve of these instructions. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny.
And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. This offense we share mounted to storm the battlements of injustice must be carried forth by a biracial army. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must take the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied, as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only. We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And that makes me think of The Wind in the Willows that I just read. I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of excessive trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. That takes a lot. Go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of the northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. So I say to you, my friends, that even though we must face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream, that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. This was the part I saw in the Smithsonian when I was little. The part that I got the goosebumps over. And it's, I teach it every year. I teach it every year to my classes, and it never diminishes or dims by even a little bit. It is searing, and it is evergreen. It will always be true. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, that one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I don't think they're listening yet, but I got some friends down in Alabama. Some of my absolute best friends, Willis and Lacey, So this is for you and your family too. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted. Every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places shall be made plain, and the crooked places shall be made straight. And the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. That hewing out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. That's the quote that was selected for the social studies mural. That's at the beginning of the F Hall in the high school. Mr. Stephen Eichfeld worked with the art department to put together and raise money for and design and plan and implement this excellent, excellent mural. And that's right when you walk in. If you haven't visited the high school, if you haven't seen the mural, I recommend you take a look at it. I've been thinking a lot about literacy these days, and how it's not confined to the books we read, and that assignments aren't confined to classrooms. We never really stopped going to school. We certainly stopped having a dress code, stopped having to be in homeroom, but we don't stop going to school. And some of us are still unwilling students. Some of us are eager students. Some of us are class clowns. Some of us are teachers' pets. But we never stop going to school. And the text and the curriculum is all around. But you gotta stop and smell the roses. You gotta take those opportunities and soak it all up, because it's there for the taking. And I highly recommend. I said this to my classes last week. Don't leave anything on the table. You know, pull every last scrap you can. I said that to my economics classes. We start that class by talking about scarcity. And scarcity is real, but it can be exaggerated. We live in a nation of unparalleled abundance. And I'm not talking about material abundance. I'm talking about spiritual abundance. I'm talking about inspirational abundance. It's all out there for the asking. So don't leave anything on the table. This mural is fantastic. Steve did a great job because he canvassed the whole department, and we all got to select quotes that were meaningful to us. And you know, I mean, like the conventional wisdom is sometimes true. Students need to see their work out there. Teachers need to see it too. We got to select these quotes that were meaningful for us. Quotes that we will literally be, walking under and passing under on a daily basis. Always kind of on our minds. Our animus, right? The spirit or the soul behind what we do. The motivating spirit. So I love that Steve did that. I love that he made it collaborative and cooperative. And when I see the Martin Luther King quote, the mountain of despair and the stone of hope, it makes me think about his monument, which is on the mall. And it was revealed earlier last decade, I believe, possibly right around 2010, I think, is when they opened it. But if you've seen this statue, it has an interesting look and demeanor. I guess when they opened the Lincoln Memorial, the original lighting configuration made it look kind of dour and gloomy and even creepy. It was the wrong tone, right? There's this magnificent statue, beautiful subject, Abraham Lincoln there for all of us. But when people visited it, they weren't in love with the way it looked. And then they made some adjustments and they made some arrangements and they made a reform and problem solved. Now it is the beacon it's supposed to be. Now it's the temple it's supposed to be. A place of solace and refuge. And again, don't leave anything on the table. If you've never been to the mall, if you've never been to the monuments, I highly recommend it. I love the Lincoln Memorial. I love the Jefferson Memorial. It's tremendously well designed. Talking a little bit about going down to the Smithsonian and experiencing that Martin Luther King on video, seeing him in motion, hearing his voice live, not live, recorded, but preserved. It was tremendously moving for me, and the monuments can be as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about one of the first times I was on the mall, and this was in college. I was visiting a friend of mine who was at Georgetown, Brendan O'Connor. He's from Scotia. He's a linguistics professor now at the University of Arizona, and he's a great friend of mine. Visiting him with another friend of ours, a guy who was going to Brandeis. So Boston University, Brandeis, we jetted down and met Brendan at Georgetown and had a whole long weekend of hanging out, playing video games like Smash Brothers. It was a good time, good college stuff. We saw an improv troupe that featured both Nick Kroll and Mike Birbiglia. It was fantastic. But we went to the mall too. And specifically, I remember going to the Jefferson Memorial. And the Jefferson Memorial has, I want to say, six quotes and excerpts from his life and his work. Quotes from the Statutes for Religious Tolerance in the state of Virginia, quotes from the Declaration of Independence, things that, real heady stuff. I mean, excellent writing. And the thing that struck me about these quotes that I thought was brilliant, and it's something that you can only get by being there, is his monument is in the round. So his statue is in the center, and on the walls all around are these quotes. But no matter where you stand, you can't see them all at the same time. If you have your back to one and see the other five, you'll be missing the one behind you. I don't know with what intention the architect designed that building, that monument. But if that was by design, it's brilliant as a commentary on our own blind spots, on our limitations. We're individuals. We can only see so much. We can only keep so much in mind at the same time. We can only focus on, we all like to think we can multitask, but we can only keep our mind on so much at any given time. Jefferson was a man with major blind spots, major contradictions, hypocrisies, duplicity. He was brilliant as an individual. He had tremendous power of sight, but even he couldn't see it all or keep it in his head at the same time. And if he couldn't, we have to understand that we won't be able to do it by ourselves either. No one's an island. No one has a monopoly on the truth. No one should have the only megaphone or bullhorn. And we have to work together so we can point these things out to each other, hold each other accountable, talk to each other, confirm things, corroborate things with each other. So I love that Jefferson Monument, but my story about it is, again, sometimes things happen, and if they happen in a Hollywood screenplay, you'd roll your eyes. You'd say, oh, come on, that's a little bit on the nose. That's a little silly. My hot coffee is now an iced coffee. These other ones are probably going to freeze. Anyway, so we're at the mall. It is September.
Andy and I flew down from Brandeis and Boston University, came into Baltimore, met up with Brendan, had a great weekend. We go to the mall, it's really nice. It's very warm still, it's September, and people are playing Frisbee on the lawn around the Washington Monument, walking around. Everybody's in a good mood. It's nice. See people reading, having eating on blankets, all that kind of stuff. Everything you want to see. We go into the Jefferson Memorial, and I'm looking around. I'm noticing this design. I'm noticing these quotes, and I think that's spectacular. Meanwhile, this is, let's see, what year was this? This was 2000. Fall 2000. So, could have been fall of 1999. Either way, it's before September 11th. So, after September 11th, a lot of the monuments got barricades put in front of them, stuff to stop cars, and just generally make it a little bit less accessible, obviously a little less vulnerable to terrorism and things like that. So people were a little freer at this point in 99 or 2000 to be able to visit these things and to interact with them. But there's still limits. They're still patrolled by the National Park Service, and there's, specific law enforcement responsible for kind of keep an eye on things, making sure that everything's fine. And while we're all kind of hanging out, reading the quotes on the wall, this little kid comes out. And this little kid is, again, if you wrote this in a screenplay, they would tell you to ease off on the symbolism, because it's a little bit too cute. This little kid was wearing overalls, red, white, and blue overalls. And he kept on slipping his father. He kept on wanting to go over and check out this statue of Jefferson. It's a very impressive statue. He's standing there, very, very, very intelligent looking. And he's standing on a plinth, so the platform there. And around it, sort of moderately guarded, is a chain, a black chain, probably cast iron, and it's all around the statue. Now, I'll give you a little side story as well. If you ever get a chance to go to the monuments at night, it's a whole different look, and not just because they fixed the lighting at the Lincoln Memorial. It's a whole different look for a lot of reasons. And I've done that as well. I did that with Willis, my friend down in Alabama. We took a road trip, a 7-week road trip cross country, and we made it into DC one night. So we parked our car and walked over to the Lincoln, walked over to the Jefferson, and seeing them lit up and being so depopulated, there's so few people around that you can really interact with them in a special way. And that's what we did. And since there was no one around, I had pictures of Willis going over that chain, and sitting right at the base of Jefferson's feet. And it's a fantastic shot. I don't know if he's got a copy of that picture, but if he doesn't, I'll make sure he gets it, because it's great. Anyway, so that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about and the lay of the land as far as the Jefferson Memorial. So we're back. I'm with Brendan and Andy, and we're standing around. We're checking out this memorial. This little kid in the red, white, and blue overalls goes over to the Jefferson statue. Keeps on slipping his dad, and he grabs the chain. He doesn't hop over it. Doesn't crawl under it. Grabs the chain and just starts shaking. And his dad is mortified because it's not quiet. It's quiet inside the monument because everybody is having a contemplative time. Everybody's thinking about the day. Everybody's thinking about the statue. Everybody's thinking about the moment. And this little kid couldn't care less.
about what everybody else came there to do. He zeroed in on that chain like he was born to it. So he walks over and he's shaking that chain. His dad's mortified. Whole place is quiet except for that. Little kid is giggling. I mean, absolutely loving it. He's rattling that chain and it's making music to him. So now his dad is not only having to pull back on this disobedience, but he's got to fight this kid's joy as well. And that is a tall order. I think any parents out there, again, I know this by observation. I don't have any kids of my own, but I'm an observer of kids. I see them every day. And I think parents out there can understand just how hard it is to put that genie back in the bottle. This kid rattled that chain, and his dad is livid, probably making a face, pulling a funny face that his kid thought was, funny. And that only added to it. But his dad is mortified. He tries to pull him away. And he's making his way to the exit. Kid is like kind of squirming in his dad's arms, making it difficult for him to carry him. And he's almost at the entrance. And finally, the dad thinks he's in the clear. Rookie mistake. He's not in the clear. As soon as he puts that kid down by the entrance, as soon as that kid's feet hit the floor, he runs right back over to that chain and shakes it again. Biggest smile on his face, just giggling away. And again, if I didn't see it, I wouldn't believe it. I would have said that sounds a little cliche, that's a little convenient. But I do think it was emblematic of something. I think it's emblematic of something in us, something that we're born with, something that we intuitively understand, the same way that as a second grader, I'm in the Smithsonian cafeteria and I'm listening to Martin Luther King and I'm moved about what this man is saying from way back in 1963, and I feel it inside in a way that doesn't or didn't make sense at the time. But it makes more sense to me all the time. So, highly recommend. Take advantage of that opportunity. Go see the monuments. Read the texts around you. Don't leave anything on the table. Go look at the mural. All right? See how you react. See how you feel. Back to the speech. Kind of forgot which one what part I was on. This might be a little bit of a repetition. That's okay too. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places shall be made plain, and the crooked places shall be made straight, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. I love the collective. I love a good collective pronoun. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Echoes of Lincoln right there. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring." And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California, but not only that. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. I have more to say about that one too. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and hamlet, from every state and city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Catholics and Protestants, will be able to join hands and to sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Stone Mountain is another kind of monument. You can visit it on the outskirts of Atlanta. I went there with Willis. That was part of the road trip as well. We were visiting a friend of ours, a friend who's from Birmingham. So nice another Alabama connection there too. Our friend Jackie Kim from Birmingham, Alabama, was going to art school in Atlanta. So on our road trip, on our 7-week road trip cross country, we decided to stop in and see her. Great time. And we went out to Stone Mountain to check it out, mostly to hike it. It's not a terribly hard hike, so we got a lot out of that. The monument itself is to Confederate generals. It's odd, it's off-putting to see that. There is a big difference between acknowledging history and celebrating it. And I think it's clear symbols matter. What we celebrate, what we point ourselves towards, what we acknowledge, what we gesture at, what we use as our compass, as our North Star, that matters. And if you're using a faulty compass, you might not get where you're going or get where you're supposed to go. So I'm glad I saw it and experienced it. I can tell you it didn't do a thing for me, but I grew up in the town of Colony with a 12309 zip code. And when I think about the Civil War, and I think about the fact that New York contributed more soldiers, lost more soldiers than any other state, the idea that anybody could fly a Confederate flag here, or want to celebrate Confederate generals, it's hard to wrap my head around. It's hard to hold those two ideas in your head at the same time. It's like walking into the Jefferson Memorial and not just missing 1 out of 6 of the walls. It's like you can only see 1 out of 6. It's like you walked in with your eyes closed. And I definitely think that's an animus. That's a motivating spirit for me, for teaching, and for what I want to, introduce students to and bring to their attention and have them remember and consider, to put the people back into into the history, into the statistics. Make it come alive, because it is. Because it's alive and because it acknowledges that what you're doing right now is what you would have done back then. That distance, whether we're talking about historical distance or geographical spatial distance, it's not an illusion, but again, we exaggerate it. We exaggerate our differences. We exaggerate the differences between us and how far apart we are. We make mountains out of molehills that we have to cross. I was talking with another friend from college last night. He's a college professor named Connor Clinker of Rhode Island, and he and Willis were both so formative for those really important college years for me, for my outlook, for my out of class education. Whether traveling with Willis and the things that I've been able to see with him, or the conversations I've had with him, Connor, if he did nothing else but introduce me to his dad, Dwayne Clinker, who introduced me to Bob Dylan. And I think that's an important thing to remember too. The teaching arrangement, education arrangement, being in classes, sometimes it can help if somebody gives you an assignment because it gives you permission to look into something. It gives you permission to go follow the thing that you're interested in. But again, just even drawing attention to it, just putting it on your radar is such an important part of the process, right? You never know what's going to take. You never know what the class is going to pull from what you were trying to say, or the things that they will remember. Usually you know in the moment, all right, oh wow, I could see their faces when I said that. Or I could see what they were, how that really hit home for them. And I could see how their demeanor changed, or I could see how they came into class with this certain energy and they walked out with another. So you can definitely tell, but Connor's dad, Dwayne, gave me this is the best way to be introduced to music. He gave me a recommendation. I asked him, what album should I start with? And it was funny. He said, well, go with Blood on the Tracks. It's mid-career Dylan at that time. This was the 1990s, so it was mid-career. Career's still going. That guy won't stop. And he's having another resurgence because of A Complete Unknown, the movie that came out that I was blown away by. It was an excellent, excellent film. I recommend. It was mid-career Dylan. I want to say Blood on the Tracks came out in '75. Connor's gonna fact check me later. I think if he's listening to this or he finds out about this, but I think it was 1975. Definitely in that ballpark. And it's mid-career Dylan, very introspective singer-songwriter. There's been a lot of discussion about the lyrics and the stories and how much he was actually revealing. It sounds like a very personal album, certainly in terms of the emotions, even if the specifics and details are indirect. As Emily Dickerson said, right, tell the truth, but tell it slant. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful album. The very first song that I felt like I was seeing something. I felt like, oh, this is interesting. This is new. This is different. Was Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts. It's this long, epic, sort of a western about a robbery and a murder and poker playing, and it's got all the great elements. Very, very dramatic, very Shakespearean. All the different elements coming together. And I just remember listening to that probably by the summer. I think I probably picked it up on my way home from Boston U and listened to it during the summer. And it was just fantastic. getting to know that album. But he also gave me a cassette. All right, anybody born in a year that starts with a 2 might not know what that is, but cassette was a music format that dominated at one time, and it was definitely made it easy to trade music. CDRs came after, and obviously we just send each other playlists and links now. But once upon a time, you made somebody a mixtape. And here's my favorite part. He made me a mixtape, the entire contents of which were the 3rd disc of the bootleg series, which the official bootleg series is something Bob Dylan's been doing since the early 90s, and he's got, I don't even know how many editions now, how many volumes there have been, but this was from the first edition, which was a triple disc that covered the span of his career, going back to his earliest recordings in Greenwich Village and folk recordings and things he didn't write, all the way to studio outtakes and cast-off songs and alternative versions and things like that. So this was the 3rd one, and it really covered the later part of his career at that point, so from the 70s to the 90s. And it was a nice companion piece or complementary piece for Blood on the Tracks, for the album from 1975. And I wore that tape out. Because you could do that, right? CDs, a little bit, maybe kind of fragile actually as a format, but they definitely, the content, it lasts a long time, but cassette tapes, a lot more subject to weather conditions, and if you play it too much, it will snap at some point, or unravel, or get too hot, or get too cold, get brittle. But I wore that one out, and it left its mark, it left its imprint on me. So Connor was instrumental just as being that bridge, and bridging that gap between generations that I was talking about before. You know, I said I wanted to be here for my mom and my dad, and I want to be here for my students, to help bridge that gap. But I want to acknowledge the moments along the way, the people who meant something to me, and who showed me something worth knowing, and worth feeling, and worth fighting for. And I would definitely count Dylan's, my introduction to Dylan among those moments. Yeah. All right. So, to that end, the very end of the I Have a Dream speech, you hear him, he's do that great rhetorical device of calling out the different places, the mountain ranges and high places all around the country. He names these different groups. He talks about people coming together, you know, black and white, Jew and Gentile, Protestant and Catholic, and so forth. And that's important too. I borrowed a tradition that I think is absolutely lovely. I hope it's not cultural appropriation. Definitely not my intent. But there's a tradition among Jewish people when they visit a gravesite, when they visit a cemetery plot and see a tombstone, to leave a rock. And they leave a rock for the person that they're grieving, for the person that they're mourning, for the person that they're remembering by going there. And I love it. You know, I'd go to a cemetery and I would see these rocks and stones, little pebbles sometimes they're bigger. And I wouldn't always know what they were for, but there's a certain amount of sense to it. It makes a certain amount of spiritual sense to do that. This leaving something behind, acknowledging that some part of the person you loved is still there, and you want to let that part know that some part of you is there too with them. So I think it's a beautiful tradition. And it's something I like to do. My dad passed away, as I said, in 2017. He's buried over in Watervliet. And I have left pebbles and stones at his graveside to let him know. And that has meaning for me on another level. My social media handle for a long time now, for a lot of different accounts and different social networks and things like that, has been Son of Rockhound. It's an identity that makes a lot of sense to me, but I want to explain it a little bit today, and I will. Not quite yet. I want to read something else before that. But I brought a couple stones today, a couple rocks, and they were my dad's. I live in the house that he bought. I live in the house that I grew up in. And so a lot of his things are around. My dad was, if you knew my dad, and if you ever visited the house, you know that man liked to save things. I'm not going to use the H word here to describe his approach to saving things. There was a lot of things that didn't need to be saved, a lot of extra, and I think that was the struggle of his adult life, was trying to keep the things worth saving above water, trying to preserve them and hand them over. My dad was not technologically savvy. He was definitely old school when it came to paper, when it came to books, when it came to how things are transmitted. This is a guy who kept a notebook filled with web addresses that he liked and wanted to go to. So a paper notebook that he saved his bookmarks in. And this was a guy who printed out emails, right? So he could have the document, especially if it was something that was meaningful to him or had meaning for him or could convey something. And that tells you something about the kind of guy he was and what he would do to save things. Another thing he did that I am grateful for growing up was growing up in a house that it didn't feel like a museum because the things weren't behind glass. They weren't something that we were going to ignore. They were to be used. They were there for our use. But walking around the house, you could pick up things. You could read through stuff. He had reference books of all kinds. He wanted to make sure that when we had questions, he would know how to point us in the direction of the answers. And that's something that I think was a huge service. He treated the house almost like Noah's Ark. Again, keeping things above water, keeping things around, preserving things for the future. And I understand it now. I didn't understand why he was doing it then. You know, growing up in a house where there were too many things, where certain rooms were filled to bursting with papers that didn't make any sense or have any relevance to me. But I get it now. I definitely get the intention. I get what he was trying to accomplish. So there's a lot of things of his around, including a lot of those books. And I find myself doing the same thing. I find myself starting to collect. I'm trying to be a little bit more careful about the way they're cataloged and archived, and maybe a little more thought into the way they're available. But back in November and December, I started a little lending library at school. And, you know, we've already lent out 25, 30 books to students. And it's all elective, which is the best thing about a library. Elective in the sense that nobody's assigning you this book. They're just making it available to you, and you're coming to it of your own free will. At the very beginning, I read that inscription from my dad on my treasured copy of Wind in the Willows that said, it's your free will choice to decide if this will be your favorite. It is. But it's important that the little lending library is elective and that people come to it on their own. They come to it because they're curious. They come to it because they're searching. They come to it because they see some value in it. So there's a lot of things in my dad's around the house. And one of the things that's around are minerals, rocks. This is a great example of quartz. Very nice crystal. It's even clearer than I thought now that I'm looking at it. So I brought this from home, and I'm going to leave it here today because my dad was a rock hound. And if you've ever seen Shawshank Redemption, or you remember that line from the movie, he gets a little rock hammer from Red, right? That's something that he wants. He wants to bring it into the prison. And Red immediately seizes on the idea that the hammer sounds like a weapon, and Red's whole game is, I gotta play nice with the guards, man. If I'm gonna be the guy who can get things for you, then I gotta keep doing that. I gotta make sure that I'm not helping somebody take a hunk out of somebody's skull with this thing. And Andy Dufresne, Tim Robbins' character, kind of laughs and says, "Yeah, I don't think you're gonna worry about that. Wait until you see it." And he finds that the rock hammer is actually pretty small. It's not a pickaxe. It's not, Mjolnir. It's just a little rock hammer. And he calls himself that. He says, "Well, why do you want these things?" And he said, "I'm a rock hound." And he's noticed that at the prison, there's all these stones in the yard, and they're different minerals and conglomerates, and he's seeing all these things, and he likes to collect them, he likes to think about them, and he likes to consider them. Well, that was my dad too. That was his real eye-opening moment for his education. Going on fossil discovery trips. They'd go to Thatcher Park. They'd go to other sites around the Capital District, and he fell in love with fossils and minerals and rocks in general. It led him to his career of geology, which is what he went to RPI for. And it led him to his career of the Department of Environmental Conservation, where he worked as an administrative law judge. And he used his geology background to help him settle hearings and cases all around the state. He'd been to every county in New York. And that may not sound like a big deal, but I'm telling you, you could put a map of the state up on the wall, and he did, several, and point to them and tell you where he ate, and who's got the best salad dressing, and who's got the comfy bed at the motel. He traveled all around for the state to do that. So it was his love of rocks and minerals and fossils and becoming a rock hound that really pointed him in the direction of his life. And that's why I call my social media accounts Son of Rock Hound. That this is something he instilled in me. They're free will choice. Like, rocks and minerals aren't the thing for me. But I love them because he loved them, and he pointed that out. So I brought one today, one of his, and I'm going to leave it here. I'm not going to tell you where. Maybe another little rock hound, some kid in red, white, and blue overalls will come in and grab it and see it, and it'll start something in him or her. that would be great. So that's where that comes from. I'm thinking about my dad a lot today, and I'm thinking about oration, and I'm thinking about these speeches. It's hard not to think about Martin Luther King and not think about the way he met his end. Something I discussed with Connor Clinker yesterday, talked to him on the phone. Martin Luther King was 39 years old. I'm going to be 46 on Saturday. So 7 years beyond how far Martin Luther King made it in terms of age, not in terms of sight or vision or anywhere near him in terms of accomplishment. But 39 and full family that he left behind, it's really hard not to think about that. It's hard not to think about that while you're imagining these other hopeful moments, these inspirational moments. I started to think about funeral speeches and eulogies, and I started to think about things like that. So I wanted to read a funeral speech, if I could. You may know this one. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend. Faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious. And Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious. And Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal. I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious. And sure, he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I do know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me. My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me. Yeah, that would get to me. If my phone stays charged, and I have access to it, or can get easy access to it, I will try to share with you some words that I said at my dad's funeral, which I very much stand by, and which I'd like you to hear. Because I think it helps bridge the gap. I think it helps connect the two. Then and now. This is from my mom's book. Great old one. I can't even tell you how many marks there are in this thing. Billy Collins talking about marginalia would have a field day with this and the things that she and whoever else used this made of it. I do want to play some music at some point too. I could bring my guitar. As you can see, I'm wearing gloves, so we'll see what I can do. It is pretty cold out here. So if I do take the gloves off so I can play, it'll probably just be for one song at a time, here and there. And what I wanted to read now, if I could share this with you, is a poem by William Butler Yeats. I mentioned Irish studies. And I mentioned how important Irish history was to me. And I talked a little bit about Steve Eichfeld's mural in the social studies department, and the quote from Martin Luther King from the March on Washington that's there. I didn't say anything about the quote that I selected. And the quote that I selected was from Seamus Heaney. And Seamus Heaney was a Nobel laureate and a great poet. I had the opportunity to hear him in Dublin as part of the Irish Studies program at Notre Dame, where I went to grad school. And Seamus Heaney was invited to participate in some seminars and some readings. He gifted every member of the seminar a translated poem. He was very interested in translation, whether it was from Irish or Beowulf, and I think that speaks to what he believed poetry was for. It certainly speaks to what I think history is for. One of my favorite quotes about history comes from the novelist L.P. Hartley, and it's, The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. So it's an act of translation for us to make sense of the words and deeds of generations who've come before, to make it relevant for our times, to help us see from their eyes how we must look. Always useful to get some outside perspective. Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Traveling around, sometimes you need to hear from the outside consultant, right? Sometimes you need to hear from the expert who may be looking at things that you're not looking at. And I think of that. I think of my job in history as an act of translation in some ways. So Seamus Heaney participated in this Irish seminar and gifted all of us this poem that he had translated, The Yellow Bittern, which is a kind of bird, kind of a maritime bird, I want to say. Seamus Heaney really made his name in the 1960s while the civil rights movement was going on. And he was from Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland faced its own form of discrimination. It was sectarianism. It was Protestants versus Catholics, Republicans versus Unionists, and all the factions therein, and all the various combinations, all the ways we categorize and taxonomize and separate ourselves with these labels and allegiances. And the movement for change in Northern Ireland took tremendous inspiration from the American Civil Rights Movement, both in terms of its animus, right, its spirit, but also in its action and in its practice and methodology. So Seamus Heaney came to prominence writing poetry during a time that was directly influenced by what was going on in the States and what was going on with Martin Luther King. And large movements, whether it's the March on Washington or the Selma March or other pivotal events. And one of my favorite poems of Seamus Heaney's is called Requiem for the Crappies, which I would like to read to you. And a requiem is a funeral mass. So it's another funeral oration. He wrote it in 1966, and 1966 was an important year. Again, symbols matter, symbolism matters. Talking today on Martin Luther King Day matters. Why this, why here, why now? He wrote it in 1966, which was the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising. And if you know any Irish history, you know things about the Easter Rising. You know about some of its participants. You know maybe Michael Collins or Edmund de Valera. Patrick Pearse, the school teacher and poet. All of these various figures that are very, very important to the Irish and Irish Americans and people all over the world who see connections between their freedom struggles in their countries and the bridges they make with others fighting for the same in their own. And I love that. I cherish the connections between the countries. It's always very moving for me, for instance, to think about the famine. My family on my mom's side was from County Mayo, and a little place called Cressard, Ballyhonus, and so forth. Mayo was one of the hardest counties hit, and all I can tell you is that my family stayed. They did not leave at that time. My mom's side didn't come until the beginning of the 20th century. So whatever happened, somebody survived that. Somebody survived those awful times during the famine. And $700 was collected by the Cherokee Nation, who at that time was 7 years out of the Trail of Tears. Resituated on a forced march, rounded up, subject to hypothermia, subject to malnutrition, mistreatment. 7 years after they endured that, they collected $700 American and sent it to the people of Ireland for relief of the famine. If that doesn't hit you somewhere, I don't know what to say. But what's the opposite of kicking somebody when they're down? They lifted themselves up by lifting the Irish up, who were experiencing this terrible, both natural and man-made disaster, this avoidable dearth of food. And the Cherokee, despite all the mistreatment at the hands of the authorities, reached out to their fellows across the Atlantic Ocean, people they would never meet, and they sent them all the money they could spare, and probably some they couldn't. I find that tremendously moving. When I think about the exchanges, cultural, monetary, etc., that exist between those two places. And I think that was happening again in the 1960s. I think that the words that Seamus Heaney was writing that were inspired in some ways by the spirit of the 60s and the spirit of the civil rights movement is tremendously affecting. So I'm going to read you Requiem for the Crappies, which he wrote in 1966 on the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising. And I want to point out that it was not the poem that people expected. It wasn't the poem that people expected because people expected him to write about Easter 1916. And instead, he wrote about the 1798 rebellion. The 1798 rebellion, like all rebellions in Ireland prior to the Free State, was doomed. Important largely for its symbolic effect, for the resonance it would have for later generations, for the inspiration they would draw from it. So he wrote about another one, and there's a lesson in that too. The way in which these revolutions are all related, how they speak to each other across time. If you're of a Gothic constitution, then you know the way they come back and haunt us from the grave. Not all hauntings are bad. Sometimes we're haunted by the truth. So I'm going to read that to you in a moment, but before I do, I'm going to read Easter 1916 by W.B. Yeats. And Yeats was commemorating the people who died in 1916. And it has a lot to say about these things as well, and I think it's a good way to set up Requiem for the Crappies. Easter 1916. My gloves don't really want to push this screen. I have met them at close of day, coming with vivid faces from counter or desk among gray 18th century houses. I have passed with a nod of the head or polite, meaningless words, or have lingered a while and said polite, meaningless words, and thought before I had done of a mocking tale or a jibe to please a companion around the fire at the club, being certain that they and I but lived where motley is worn, all changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. That woman's days were spent in ignorant goodwill, her nights in argument, until her voice grew shrill. What voice more sweet than hers, when young and beautiful she rode to harriers. This man had kept a school, that's Patrick Pierce, and rode our winged horse. The Pegasus is the symbol for the poets. This other, his helper and friend, was coming into his force. He might have won fame in the end, so sensitive his nature seemed, so daring and sweet his thought. This other man I had dreamed a drunken and vainglorious lout. He had done most bitter wrong to some who are near my heart. Yet I number him in the song. He too has resigned his part in the casual comedy. He too has been changed in his turn, transformed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. Hearts with one purpose alone, through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone to trouble the living stream. The horse that comes from the road, the rider, the birds that range from cloud to tumbling cloud, minute by minute they change. A shadow of cloud on the stream changes minute by minute. A horse hoof slides on the brim, and a horse splashes within it. The long-legged moorhens dive, and hens to moorcocks call. Minute by minute they live, the stones in the midst of all. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. Oh, when may it suffice? That is heaven's part. Our part to murmur name upon name, as a mother names her child, when sleep at last has come, on limbs that had run wild. What is it but nightfall? No, not night, but death. Was it needless death after all? For England may keep faith, for all that is done and said. We know their dream. Enough to know they dreamed and are dead. And what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? I write it out in a verse. McDonough and McBride, and Connolly and Pierce, now and in time to be, wherever green is warm, are changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. Hey, Brother Bill. Right now, my one from Stewart's is frozen. So I have some here, but these are probably getting cold too. I'll take just a little milk, no sugar. Yeah. If you could, I have not been able to find a charger for my phone that works. Okay. Like, it's strange. I can plug it in. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be cooperating. Oh, no, now it's going. I think we're okay. Yep. It just needed, I think it probably got a little snow or crystals in it, so it needed to warm up. Sure. Yeah. Massive reinforcements. Fantastic. I got a little heater here, and I got a little propane one down here. Alright. You want anything besides the coffee, something? Hot dog, chili? How about... Stuart's got plenty. I want like peanuts or cashews or something like that, or a trail mix. Little trail mix. All right, cool. So that's the W.B. Yeats, and it's a bit of a funeral oration. He's pledging, even to people, the one he called the vainglorious lout. He's a drunken, vainglorious lout. W.B. Yeats, even at that time, where he's acknowledging these people and their sacrifice, their commitment to this higher ideal. He's not shying away from the truth as he sees it. That this man can have personal issues, personal problems, and still devote that last full measure. Certainly, one of the things we don't talk about, certainly not in a high school classroom, I'm sure they do at the college level, and I know they do online. Not only are people loath to talk about Martin Luther King after 1963 and about the other things that he's doing, they also like to not bring up his personal life, the way in which he was targeted by the FBI, the surveillance that was revealed by the leak of COINTELPRO, and so on and so forth. This man was very young. He was 39 years old, and he was very despised by the end of his life. We can't just remember the parts we want. We have to face the parts we don't want. And that includes the man himself. He was not perfect. People love to kind of play the purity game online and point out, well, Martin Luther King, and he was unfaithful to his wife and engaged in this and engaged in that. Yes, all true. It's not the point you think you're making, though. You think that means we should discount his whole life and his career and his work and his devotion and his sacrifice because of mistakes and his humanity. What I hear is that means I can do something too. With all the mistakes I've made and flaws and temptations and everything else, it doesn't mean that I have to wait until I'm perfect to say something or demand a standard of myself that is unreasonable and that would be paralyzing for action. If you're waiting around for conditions to be perfect, for you to feel completely worthwhile, I am here to tell you today, you're there. Conditions are perfect. It's time to start using your voice. It's time to start getting involved. It's time to start paying attention. It's time to pay attention to the parts that we want to and use that as the fuel that keeps us going, but to not shy away from the hard stuff either. There's a lot of ugly truth, hard to bear truth, a burden. It's funny, like it can be very tricky to rehash the past, whether you're talking about the study of it, the study of history, or your own, and looking into your own background or the background of the people you love. That makes me think about my dad and the stuff that he kept as well. So as I said, I live in the house that he bought way back in 1970, and it fell to me, not out of anybody else forcing it, or even out of a sense of obligation. It fell to me to go through his things, sort out what was important to save, what could be consigned to the dustbin of history, and to preserve mementos, to find, important documents. We came across some doozies as well, both sides of the family, moms and dads. A family Bible written in German from the 1880s, when that side of the family came over to the U.S. Their relatives back in Germany sent a million Deutschmark note from 1923 as Germany was experiencing its hyperinflation under Weimar. And they basically sent it over as a novelty, as a little collectible, a bookmark. Here's a $1 million Deutschmark note. All right, it's worthless. So we're gonna just put it right in the envelope for you to see. But we came across all kinds of like little treasures like that. And came across everything else too. My dad's scattered thoughts, scribbled ideas, to-do lists, wish lists. I came across his notebook that had all the websites he wanted to remember to go to. And so much of it was charming and lovely. Cards that he saved, things that he got from other people, which was not the balance of trade with my dad. My dad was very much a giver of gifts. He was always on the lookout for something that he thought somebody could use, somebody would like. And I loved that about him. I think it was my favorite trait of his. He was always looking to see if he could find something that would enrich somebody else's life or make their day better. I found this article and I clipped it for you and I'm going to send it your way. And I tried to keep that going. I do not have his eye, and I don't have his maybe endurance for that particular. But I'm going to keep trying because I think it's a good ideal to shoot for. But in addition to all the lovely gifts and the things that you could find, there were also things that were hard to read. Things that were private for him, private to him. Not every memento is heartwarming. We save the things, the detritus of our lives, along with everything else. And, I had to experience that and rehash that, perform a little archaeology on my dad's life. But the big takeaway for me for all that was, again, this was an imperfect man who did his best. And it was a lesson for me that I didn't need to stop just because I messed up. I still had something to contribute. I still had something to say. I think that way about Martin Luther King. I think that way about my dad. I think that way about myself. And that's why it's meant a lot. So I want to read Requiem for the Crappies, another funeral oration or commemoration. As I said, I would love to get around to reading the eulogy as well, and give you a chance to hear that. I'm going to wait a little bit a while for that. So this is Requiem for the Crappies by Seamus Heaney, which he wrote and published in 1966 on the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising, and we just read Easter 1916 by W.B. Yeats as a way to set that up a little bit. So the Crappies, for the Crappies, this is a nice connection too, just to sort of hairstyles and things like that. The Crappies were called that because these Irish peasants would, in order to be light on their feet and not get weighed down with excessive hair or get caught in the underbrush as they're fleeing the authorities, would wear their hair closely cropped. And so this was the nickname for these guys, which is similar actually to the Roundheads of the English Civil War, if we think about them. Which is solid ice. Requiem for the Crappies, 1798 rebellion. This was how Seamus Heaney memorialized them 50 years after the Easter Rising, connecting the various revolutions to each other, talking about the great Gothic force of the dead never being truly gone, of their spirit animating us as we go forward. So it's hard not to think about Martin Luther King's end when we talk about his beginnings, and it's hard not to think about him as a flawed person amidst all of the wonderful things. Today, and I think in general, what do we do at funerals? We perform eulogies, and that prefix, that EU, right? We're focusing on the good part. We're focusing on the positive. Okay. The pockets of our great coats full of barley. No kitchens on the run. No striking camp. We moved quick and sudden in our own country. The priest lay behind ditches with the tramp. A people hardly marching on the hike. We found new tactics happening each day. We cut through reins and rider with the pike and stampede cattle into infantry. Then retreat through hedges where cavalry must be thrown until on Vinegar Hill, the final conclave. Terraced thousands died, shaking scythes at cannon. The hillside blushed, soaked in our broken wave. They buried us without shroud or coffin, and in August, the barley grew up out of our grave. There's those excellent collective pronouns again. Whether we're talking about, it's always we and our. He's not giving them a voice out of some kind of like a poetic license by speaking from the collective. He's acknowledging that we're the same. We're the latest iteration of that generation. We're the flag bearers, the torch passers, or the baton passers. We're connecting each other. And just the details in that poem, I love so much. Shaking sides at cannon, right? The historical injustice of those two groups facing off against each other. It's just tremendous to think about. But all those little details too. They can't make kitchens on the run, so they carry barley in their pockets, right? Kind of eat things as they go. My brother just stopped by. He's hopping down to Stewart's to grab me some trail mix, so I'm going to try to do the same thing. And they get struck down where they are, where they stand, and because everything is so ad hoc and impromptu, the barley that is left in their coats gets buried with them, and barley grows up out of the grave, and the circle of life goes on. The spirits of the former generations animating the current ones. So it's a good lesson to remember. I'm going to read another eulogy now. Not one about Martin Luther King, but one that Martin Luther King delivered. This was from September 1963. A little bit over 2 weeks after he delivered I Have a Dream speech. The Reverend Dr. King delivered this sermon at the funeral of the little girls who were killed on the 15th of September 1963 by a bomb as they attended the Sunday school of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. This afternoon, we gather in the quiet of this sanctuary to pay our last tribute of respect to these beautiful children of God. They entered the stage of history just a few years ago. And in the brief years that they were privileged to act on this mortal stage, they played their parts exceedingly well. Now the curtain falls. They move through the exit. The drama of their earthly life comes to a close. They are now committed back to that eternity from which they came. These children, unoffending, innocent, and beautiful, were the victims of one of the most vicious, heinous crimes ever perpetrated against humanity. And it is hard, again, not to read something like this and not think about a plague of school shootings that we deal with now that have become so commonplace we don't want to talk about it and we don't want to point it out. But the shelter-in-place drills that we do at our schools now, the interruptions for those things, our kids live with this fear that other generations have lived with it a different way. Yet they died nobly. They are the martyred heroines of a holy crusade for freedom and human dignity. So they have something to say to us in their death. They have something to say to every minister of the gospel who has remained silent behind the safe security of stained glass windows. They have something to say to every politician who has fed his constituents the stale bread of hatred and the spoiled meat of racism. They have something to say to a federal government that has compromised with the undemocratic practices of Southern Dixiecrats and the blatant hypocrisy of right-wing Northern Republicans. They have something to say to every Negro who passively accepts the evil system of segregation and stands on the sidelines in the midst of a mighty struggle for justice. They say to each of us, black and white alike, that we must substitute courage for caution. They say to us that we must be concerned not merely about who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, and the philosophy which produced the murderers. Their death says to us that we must work passionately and unrelentingly to make the American dream a reality. So they did not die in vain. God still has a way of wringing good out of evil. History has proven over and over again that unmerited suffering is redemptive. It's the same line from the March on Washington. Again, less than 3 weeks before this. The innocent blood of these little girls may well serve as the redemptive force that will bring new light to this dark city. The Holy Scripture says, "A little child shall lead them." The death of these little children may lead our whole Southland from the low road of man's inhumanity to man to the high road of peace and brotherhood. These tragic deaths may lead our nation to substitute an aristocracy of character for an aristocracy of color. The spilt blood of these innocent girls may cause the whole citizenry of Birmingham to transform the negative extremes of a dark past into the positive extremes of a bright future. Indeed, this tragic event may cause the white South to come to terms with its conscience. So in spite of the darkness of this hour, we must not despair. We must not become bitter. Nor must we harbor the desire to retaliate with violence. We must not lose faith in our white brothers. Somehow we must believe that the most misguided among them can learn to respect the dignity and worth of all human personality. May I now say a word to you, the members of the bereaved families. It is almost impossible to say anything that can console you at this difficult hour and remove the deep clouds of disappointment which are floating in your mental skies. But I hope you can find a little consolation from the universality of this experience. Death comes to every individual. There is an amazing democracy about death. It is not aristocracy for some of the people, but a democracy for all of the people. Kings die and beggars die. Rich men die and poor men die. Old people die and young people die. Death comes to the innocent and it comes to the guilty. Death is the irreducible common denominator of all men. I hope you can find some consolation from Christianity's affirmation that death is not the end. Death is not a period that ends the great sentence of life, but a comma that punctuates it to more lofty significance. Death is not a blind alley that leads the human race into a state of nothingness, but an open door which leads man into life eternal. Let this daring faith, this great invincible surmise be your sustaining power during these trying days. At times, life is hard as crucible steel. It has its bleak and painful moments, like the ever-flowing waters of a river. Life has its moments of drought and its moments of